Hello and welcome along once again to It'll Be Alright in the 90s, the podcast which has just rented some games from Forward Video in the precinct and can't wait to get home and give them a try. I'm Stu Joslin and joining me as always is Alex Greenwood. Greenie, it seems like ages since we last spoke. How have you been doing, mate?
Yes, I've been good, thanks. Yeah, it's been a while. I'm not sure what that is, that feeling's all about, but I guess it's just that we miss this pod when we're not recording it. Even if it's only 2 weeks, it feels like a long time, doesn't it?
It does indeed. It's always nice to get together and chat 90s, isn't it?
Yeah, especially when we're talking about something like the games of 1996. I love the games episodes we do, and I think this is a good year, so I'm looking forward to talking about that later.
It definitely is. There's some great stuff to discuss here. We are talking about the video games of 1996. We're going to get to that shortly. But first of all, a word from our sponsor tonight, Pat Poolman's Mini Mart. Now, I say that Pat Poolman's Mini Mart is our sponsor. It's not really. It doesn't exist anymore, and we don't have an offer for it. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit of a story that I didn't think I could fit in on the pod anywhere else, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I've always remembered Pat Poolman's Mini Mart in the back of my mind because it was a huge, yellow, almost sort of horse lorry type vehicle that used to come down the road that both my parents and my nan and granddad lived on regularly, because there was an area on the road called Spring Tyning, which was home to a cluster of bungalows where elderly people lived. And Pat Poolman's Mini Mart was exactly what it sounds like. It's a mobile mini market. And I just wanted to read you something here. I looked for a little bit more information on Pat Poolman's mini market, and I found this from January 2003. I just want to read it to you if I can. Pat's mobile mini market, which provided a lifeline for many of Wiltshire's elderly and isolated people, has come to the end of the road. The one-stop shop on wheels, owned by Pat Poolman, 68, sold everything from cabbages to light bulbs and provided an invaluable service to elderly customers in communities such as Corsham, South Wraxall and Biddiston for 35 years. Customers such as Sylvia Hamilton, 88, from Biddiston, who has crippling arthritis and has been able to leave her house only once in 5 years, will miss him and will now have to rely on friends and neighbours to get her groceries. Pat's Mini Market's first incarnation was as a mobile greengrocer, but if people wanted a specific item and Mr. Poolman did not have it, he would ensure he stocked it in his van for his next visit. His range of stock rapidly expanded from vegetable and tinned food to stamps, watches and stationery. By the time he decided to try and sell his van, he stocked 1,700 different items. He proudly recalls how in 1995, Tom Robinson, 80, from Marshfield, said he would buy groceries from Mr. Poolman on one condition, that Mr. Poolman would keep serving him until Mr. Robinson passed away. Mr. Poolman supplied Mr. Robinson with his groceries every week until 2 years ago when he attended his funeral. He died aged 93. So I just wanted to read you that because that is just a little memory. There is a man who has dedicated his working career to assisting the elderly, the less fortunate, the people who aren't able to get out and get their groceries and the vital things that they need, like light bulbs, other little bits and pieces like stationery, things like that. That's like a little unexpected bit of research bonus that I've made. And I just think the world needs a few more Pat Poolmans, don't you?
Absolutely, yeah. Very much the fabric of small town communities, people like Pat Poolman for sure. And what was it that made you think of that? Did you just stumble across that article or did something bring him to mind randomly?
It just came back to mind that I used to see this, especially when I stayed with my nan and granddad during the school holidays, because they were living right opposite Spring Tyning. So I would often see the big yellow van going in there and the residents coming out and getting their little bits and pieces from Pat. And it's just something I've been meaning to mention on the podcast for a while, actually. So I wrote it in my book. And then just before we came on air tonight, I thought I'll try and find something a bit more concrete about him. And I found that lovely article which just says what a stand-up guy he was, and with some really nice words from the people that he served and the people that he helped out over the years. So yeah, our sponsor tonight, Pat Poolman's Mini Mart. Let's all be a bit more like Pat.
I think that sparked a memory. I'm maybe conflating memories in my mind now. It seems like there is maybe a kernel of a memory there based on what you've said, but I think I might be getting mixed up with was there a library lorry that used to go around? It was like a removal lorry style shape, but it was green and it was Wiltshire Libraries. And it would pull up and then you'd go in. Maybe it'd pull up to primary school or something. You could go in and get books in there. Have I imagined that?
I'm pleased to say I still see the Wiltshire Council Mobile Library on the regular around the highways and byways of Wiltshire. Good. So the mobile library is still going, and a vital service it provides in the community as well. Long may it continue. Let's get more mobile shops and libraries on the road.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
There's yet another campaign for this podcast to throw its considerable weight behind.
Yeah. It's the internet's had its day, hasn't it? The internet wiped out the high street. It's about time the internet had its own comeuppance and was overtaken by something else. So there you go.
Time for the post bag and for the pod notice board. Alex, what have you got over there?
Well, we had quite a strong response to our bin content that was floating around on our social media for a while, because we unofficially did the What's the Most 90s bin in our birthday bonus episode. And the airwaves were a flare with responses and thoughts about this. Obviously, we touched a nostalgia nerve. We got a message in from McRufus on Instagram who says the following. The first time I went to Scotland as a child in the early 90s, I was greeted by an amazing Irn Bru can-shaped bin. I can't find any images of it, but there must be some somewhere. Brackets, I'm sure it did exist. I think it was at the Sea Life Centre near Edinburgh, brackets now Deep Sea World, but it could have been at a service station. Either way, I remember it making me smile. I wonder if any Scottish listeners or followers could attest to their existence. So, listeners, do you remember a big Irn Bru can-shaped bin? Somewhere maybe around the Edinburgh area or anywhere else in Scotland. Maybe it snuck south of the border as well because, you know, Irn Bru is drunk down here occasionally. But does anyone remember that? Stu, do you remember it?
I don't, I'm afraid, but I think I know somebody who might be able to throw some light on this, and that's our old friend Mark from Glasgow.
Yes, Mark from Glasgow, get in touch. Do you remember the Irn Bru can-shaped bin?
Staying in Scotland, I was made aware of a story a few weeks ago to do with a footballer called Gerry Collins, who sadly passed away last month. Not a footballer that I was aware of. He played for teams such as Albion Rovers, A United, Hamilton Accies and Partick Thistle. This story comes from his time as assistant manager from Partick Thistle, and I'm just going to read the short news story here, which is titled Hard-Hatted Ref Bans Gerry. So I'll read these couple of paragraphs for you here. It's a hard hat life for Partick Thistle assistant Gerry Collins. Collins tried to beat a dugout ban by going undercover as a building worker at Firhill. The Jags number 2 bawled to his players from the steps of Firhill's new £2.5 million stand, which is currently under construction. But referee Martin Clark wasn't fooled and ordered him to a seat in the real stand. Collins, who could face an SFA fine for breaking his ban, wasn't impressed, and Jags boss John Lambie said he wasn't doing any harm. And this is accompanied by some fantastic pictures of Gerry Collins in a suit and hard hat with the Partick Thistle logo on the front in this empty stand, shouting instructions to his players. So this is something from the sort of more bizarre side of football that I had not been made aware of. It's lovely when you come across these things and you haven't seen them before. So just a shout out to Gerry Collins, sadly passed away last month, but one of the all-time great funny football moments of the 90s, I would say there.
Yeah, absolutely outrageous behaviour that. Like the idea of going undercover for him just meant putting a hard hat on. That's the only thing he did that was undercover, because he stood there on his own in his completely empty stand with a suit on. He's clearly not a construction worker and it's in the middle of a match. So obviously they wouldn't be doing any work during the match. But in the footage, when he gets approached by the referee, he like puts his arms out like innocently, like what am I doing wrong? It's good quality 90s footballing content for sure. And yeah, we'll put the link below.
We certainly will. It reminded me of a similar sort of thing. I was a sort of semi-regular at Bristol City about 10 years ago when I had nothing better to do. And they were reconstructing one of their stands at the time behind one of the goals. And while the stand was being constructed during home games, a fan would quite often appear on the roof of his garage, which backed onto the ground. But because the stand had been obviously decimated and was being built up again, up until a certain level, he could stand on his garage and watch the matches for free. And I remember him having his own chant and everything. So I love stuff like that. Absolutely.
I do remember hearing about the garage fan at Ashton Game. The other thing I have for the notice board is another missive from Dada the Pod, who has got in touch with more goings on in the shady underworld of our back room at the pod, basically.
Okay, hit me.
Word of warning, lads. Jeff is getting into crypto. Selling, not buying, and he's looking for investors. He caught me a couple of days ago. It was the day of the annual Masonic Hall hide and seek competition. Brackets. This year's prize was a signed photo of Alexander Armstrong, so it was hotly contested. And I was sharing my usual spot, the Wincarnis storage cupboard, with Bob Wadswick. We were in there quite a while because the sports committee had neglected to nominate the seeker, so no one was actually looking for us. Regardless of this, we spent a pleasant afternoon in the darkness of the cupboard chatting about this and that. Bob was bragging about his age. He said he was so old his first passport picture was done in charcoal on a cave wall, which made international travel nigh on impossible. I was expressing some doubts about this when the cupboard door was flung open to reveal Jeff standing there looking very shiny-faced. Brackets, you know how shiny-faced he gets when he has a new scheme on the go. He had a go at explaining it all, but Bob and I were a bit lightheaded from the Wincarnis fumes and we didn't really take it in. In the end, I gave him a couple of tenors and Bob did too. I'm now waiting, without any great expectation, for the money to start rolling in. By the way, the hide-and-seek competition is one of the few Masonic Hall events to which the ladies are invited, and, in spite of there being no seeker, Alex's mother somehow claimed a prize, and Alexander Armstrong now beams down at us from the breakfast nook wall. There you go. Crypto, that's the new game.
So that's where all of our Apple Podcast money's going now.
Seemingly, yeah. I thought crypto was on the way out. I thought famously it was a bit of a dead duck these days, but maybe Jeff knows better.
Well, either that or Jeff, as he has proved himself to be during his career with us, is sort of 10 seconds behind the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Just about failing to catch the bus at the right time. Just missing it.
Yes, exactly, yeah. A bit like us doing a pod. Maybe not 10 minutes, more like 10 years, but we're here now.
Indeed, we're here to stay. Well, you are. I might not be. Because speaking of Jeff, I hope he's got a few quid put away to help me get out of the latest legal battle that the podcast finds itself embroiled in.
This doesn't sound good.
Well, I mean, this involves you as well. You are accessory to the fact.
Okay, I think I might know what this is. Go on, tell us.
Yes. So this goes back to our recent 90s night at the Hop Chapel on the outskirts of Swindon. Very well received. Thank you to everybody who came down. We look forward to going back again soon. I picked you up from Chippenham train station to take you to the Hop Chapel, as was the plan, and then dropped you back again at the end of the evening. You had a bit of luck. Didn't you find a tenner on the floor or something?
I did, yeah. I found a tenner on the floor at the bus stop on the way back, so that paid for the night.
Well, you might end up having to submit that to me to contribute towards my ongoing legal fees, because this weekend, what did I receive through the post but a parking offence notice from the good people who monitor Wiltshire's worst car park, Chippenham Station short stay, saying that I had entered the car park at 5:19 p.m. and not left again until 10:44 p.m. So they think that I was in there for 6 hours. Now, of course, my appeal was filed immediately. I've already engaged you as my star witness, and Jeff, if we can find him, will be my counsel. I'm willing to take this all the way to Strasbourg.
Quite right. I mean, it's scandalous the way the gangsters down there at North West Wiltshire District Council run their car parks. They're out of control. They're like dogs off a leash. It's
absolutely scandalous. Basically, the ANPR hasn't caught me leaving the car park and then coming back again. They've only caught me coming in the first time and leaving the last time. So I'm hopeful that my appeal will be heard and I will get a fair trial. But yeah, I mean, Chippenham Station, short stay, it's a terrible car park. The flow is all wrong. The entrance is about 2 metres too narrow. So you can't have two cars coming in and out at the same time, turning off of a main road. It's absolutely terrible. If the newly elected government, whatever party it is, want to do one thing to please me, sort that car park out.
That will teach you a lesson, though, about leaving car parks at 200 miles an hour. I mean, no wonder the camera didn't catch you.
I told you not to mention that part.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Time now for What's the Most 90s. And this time, Stu, I'm asking you what the most 90s fairground or theme park ride is.
Well, for me, there's only one answer here. I'm going down the fairground route. And fond memories of Jennings Fun Fair, the local fun fair company, which used to visit Wiltshire, still does visit Wiltshire, in fact. They were in Chippenham only a few weekends ago, but always a big draw down to the Springfield when we were young. The specific time I'm recalling here is probably 1997 or 1998. My friend Jeff Hendy had come round for tea after school. The fun fair happened to be in town, so Dad of the pod begrudgingly took us down there after we'd eaten. And the ride that we were most keen to try was the Sizzler. Now, do you know what I mean when I say the Sizzler?
No, I don't.
Okay, so it's got sort of 5 or 6 arms on it. It's a sort of a carousel ride, but it's sort of bucket seats which 3 people can sit in. And then they rotate at various speeds and in various directions. And you just have a nice old time getting spun round and then you get off again. But this is quite a famous instance in our house because obviously my dad, Jeff, and I all got on the ride. The biggest person, in this case my dad, had to sit on the edge where most of the centrifugal force was going to be.
Yeah.
So obviously you couldn't have like a sort of 6-year-old child on the edge where the adults were going to sort of crush them. So my dad had to sit in the big boy seat, and he said that when he came off the ride, he felt like he'd been in a car accident because of the combined weight of myself and Jeff pushing on him while we were being spun round at about 30 or 40 miles an hour was not pleasant, and he still speaks about it to this day. So whenever I happen to walk past the fun fair, whenever it's visiting Monkton Park in Chippenham, the Sizzler's still going. I don't know if it's the same ride. I would hope it's been updated in the last sort of 25 years or so. But I always have a think back to that time on the Sizzler when my dad got crunched.
Nice. Yeah, you'd always know when Jennings Fun Fair had been at the Springfield in Caution, because the whole playing field was just one giant quagmire. It was like the Somme at the end of 1916. Like terrible to try and play football on.
Yeah, you had to let the ground lay fallow for a little while, didn't you?
You did, yeah, like a year off after Glastonbury every so often. The ride I've gone for is a specific ride as well, but this is more of a theme park ride, and it is Nemesis. So a big ride at Alton Towers. Opened in the Forbidden Valley section of Alton Towers in 1994, and this was the ride that everyone was talking about when I was at primary school, and I think also going into secondary school. Actually, it was just the most well-known named roller coaster in the country at this time. I can't really think of any others actually, apart from I suppose the big one in Blackpool, which had been around for a long time and still is around, obviously. But it was new, had kind of a scary name. It looked kind of intimidating, and yeah, everyone was talking about it. Now, I never went to Alton Towers in the 90s. I did eventually go in 2006, I think it was, in when I was at uni, and I did go on Nemesis, so I have managed to go on it once. And it's obviously been refurbished quite recently, so this was the old iteration of it, and it was quite intimidating. It was a lot of fun. It really throws you around quite a lot, and I think because it was a bit older, it'd been going for 12 years at this point, it was quite a little bit rickety, and it would it didn't feel really tight on the rails. It would sort of rattle a little bit from side to side, and I remember it being quite a physical workout. Like, it was really throwing you around. So it was well worth finally going to go on it, and waiting for the queues as you have to do with these sort of things. Yeah, very much a 90s ride, I think. I know it's back again, as I said, and maybe superseded by Oblivion when that came in also in the 90s, but right at the end of the decade. That was the other big one that was kind of scarier, I guess. I never went on that, but I think Nemesis just felt like the first big named ride that I could think of. I don't know, listeners, if you can think of anything older than that, then let us know. But that seemed like a big event. Even though we didn't live anywhere near Alton Towers, did we? We were miles away, but it was, people knew about it. So that's why I've gone for it, basically. It was the infamous ride of the 90s.
Well, how can the little Sizzler possibly compare with that? I don't think it can be done, can it?
It's a mismatch, I'd say.
It is a mismatch, yeah. Theme parks, for me, not very much of a theme park kid, it has to be said. I remember going to Chessington World of Adventures when I was 8 or 9, but that's probably not a theme park in the biggest sense, if you see what I mean. That is probably more for the younger child, I would say, Chessington World of Adventures. I've never been to Alton Towers. Don't think I've ever been to Thorpe Park or anywhere like that. Yeah, this is obviously a hole that I need to fill in my life.
I think we were theme park kids to some extent. We would go to Thorpe Park every now and again. We would go to Pleasurewood Hills, just outside Lowestoft, occasionally. But I was terrified of roller coasters, so I never actually went on any roller coasters as a kid. I just loved going on like the really gentle stuff, like the river rapids and the cars that you just sit in and they go around on rails. So stuff like that I just loved. But too scared to go on a roller coaster until I went to uni, and now I love them. Although now I've got to the age where I can't go on them without feeling motion sickness immediately. So didn't have a very long window of enjoying them. But
follow it up with a quick go on the teacups, mate. You'll be fine. That'll set you right.
So what are we going to choose then?
Well, it has to be Nemesis, doesn't it? I think. I don't think Sizzler is any competition. In it goes. Okay, now all that good stuff is out of the way. We are, of course, here tonight to talk about the video games of 1996. This is a very exciting one. This is a very, very good year for video games. First of all, Alex, where were you personally with video gaming in 1996?
I was still strongly an Amiga kid at this point. This was pre-PlayStation for me. So it would have been kind of the end of my Amiga days. So it would have been an Amiga 1200, probably very much still into cannon fodder, playing Bubble Bobble regularly with my brother. It's sort of the end of the Amiga's life where the games were pretty good, but it was, feeling like the last generation's gaming system. And it was, being outclassed by a lot of other systems. And all of my friends had Mega Drives, I think, at this point, and maybe even a couple had PlayStations, just about. So that's, very much Amiga for me. What about you?
My parents and I moved house in 1996 to the house that they still live in now. This was still very much a Mega Drive time for me. So I remember not long after moving in, trying to set up the Mega Drive myself without any help from my dad, and sort of screwing up all the TV channels, and my mum having a bit of a pop. So I remember that clearly. But then during this year, there must have been the flirtation with the Sega Saturn, and then the PlayStation coming in, I think, was all in this calendar year. So yeah, really plenty going on. And in fact, my 3 games are across 3 different consoles. So yeah, that just goes to show what a wind of change was blowing at that time.
Yes, I think we'll come to that later. In terms of the things that were happening in the gaming landscape more widely, this was the year that the N64 launched, which actually surprised me. I had totally forgotten how early it was, because it's obviously, the PlayStation was 32-bit and that had been released in 95. And only the year after, we were onto the 64-bit console. So I was really surprised about that. I do remember having lots of heated arguments with Big Tim Parker and Nick Gent about what was better out of the PlayStation and the N64, although that would have been in a couple of years' time. But yeah, a big year for Nintendo. The Atari Jaguar was discontinued in 1996, so I think that was the end of Atari, really, wasn't it? Then on the 7th of September 1996, Sega opened Sega World London as part of the Trocadero in England, the largest and first Sega World park to open outside of Japan. Did you ever go to Sega World?
I'm afraid not, no. Although friend of the pod Adam Taylor, I'm led to believe, won some sort of prize on the Sega bus at some point. Was the Sega bus at Sega World, or are they 2 different entities?
I'm not sure. I did go to Sega World once, briefly, and I don't remember there being a bus there. In fact, all I can remember is the sort of futuristic escalator that would go up from the entrance and go up into it. It was so exciting. There's some really good articles actually about the history of Sega World. I read one recently which I should find and link to below because it was really good. But
please do, yeah.
I'm not sure about the bus. Yeah, it was a real moment in time, Sega World, and I think a lot of kids our age, well, a lot of adults our age now will have experienced it and have memories of it. It was a real moment. Mm-hmm. So they were the things that happened in 1996.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll get in touch with Adam and find out if that is correct and what memories he has of winning his big prize on the Sega bus. But I'm fairly sure that's true. So I'll see what I can find out on that. So, as is the regular format for these sorts of episodes, we've each chosen 3 of our favourite games from the year to talk about. Alex, what have you got first up?
Well, to clarify, we have chosen games that were released in the UK in 1996. So some of these big releases from 96 actually weren't in the UK, so that's why we're not going to cover them. But my first choice is Tomb Raider, which I had to choose. I've already talked about it once because it was in my Games of 95 to 99 episode, which was way back when we were just doing the decade in games in 2 halves, which was naive to say the least, and we're now also doing it year by year. So Tomb Raider was published by Eidos, who, I don't know if you remember, Stu, sponsored which football club around the turn of the millennium?
Manchester City.
Of course, yes. And I don't know if you've noticed this, that the old Eidos logo is really similar to their current Etihad logo. So it's almost like in your mind you can conflate the two and imagine that they still are sponsored by Eidos. But it is kind of funny to think that, games developers were on such big clubs' football shirts back then. It was a different time. Like when Amiga and Commodore were on the Chelsea shirts and Sega on Arsenal's and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, a good tie in there between football and computer games. But as I say, yes, published by Eidos. It was released on the PS1, the Saturn and the PC. So it was only really Nintendo that missed out on Tomb Raider. As I said, I've chosen it before because I think it's just an incredible game. And I think it represents the dawn of a new era of console gaming that kind of swept away those old consoles or helped pushed them sort of off into the dustbin of history. So like the Jaguar, the Amiga was on its way out, the SNES was on its way out. I personally associate it most with the PlayStation. I think probably a big part of that is because that's what I had it on. But also I think the PlayStation and Tomb Raider together kind of typified this new era of gaming that I was talking about. So where gaming became more mainstream in the late 90s, and it wasn't just for kids or computer nerds. It was now for kind of young men and lads in inverted commas. And it sort of went along with kind of lads mags and that whole lad culture of the 90s, and PlayStation especially really went in with that, and Tomb Raider did as well, and Lara Croft became like an icon for that, and she obviously appeared in lots of magazines, popular culture magazines, as an icon, and lots of marketing campaigns. So I think it feels like a very 90s game and part of that era. But when you set aside all of that stuff, which I think a lot of it feels quite grubby now looking back, or that kind of the objectification of her, and obviously there's elements of her design which feel like they're very targeted towards a certain demographic. But when you put all of that aside, I think it is just an amazing game, and I think it is totally more than just that. It's a great game in its own right. I think it's really atmospheric, and I think it gets underappreciated for that. Actually, the sequel gets a lot more love, I think, and I do also love Tomb Raider 2. It's a great game, but I think the first one is the most nostalgic for me, and it's my favorite of all the Tomb Raider games. I think the fact that there's very few humans in it, it's very much a kind of beasts like wolves and bats and those sort of enemies, and there's actually not that many of them compared to modern games. So it really does put the focus on you and the exploring and the sort of loneliness of being in these abandoned tombs and these caves. And the music is quite sparse, but it's really great music. I would say the menu music alone is one of the most nostalgic sounds for me. And we've talked about most 90s sounds recently, but I would say that's in my top 5 computer game sounds of the 90s, or of my childhood, is the Tomb Raider menu sound. But all the music in it's really good, and I think the general atmosphere combined with that music, combined with the fact that I think it's really fun to play and it looks really good. Obviously it's a bit dated now, but at the time it looked really good. I just think it was, I think it's an amazing game. I think it's iconic for the 90s, and I think I had to choose it for those reasons.
I don't think we could talk about the games of 1996 without mentioning Tomb Raider. So what this brings for me is memories of sitting and watching rather than being involved. So I think a friend of the pod, Teresa, said something similar when we asked her about her favourite video game of the 90s, because she had strong memory of watching her brothers play and not being too much involved. But my memory is of sitting on my bed, because the PlayStation was in my bedroom, watching my dad play Tomb Raider. That was one of his favourite games of all time. He collected quite a lot of Lara Croft merchandise. I remember he had a couple of plastic models that were stood in different backgrounds that he bought for sort of collectible purposes. I don't know if he still got them. And that he bought a sort of guidebook. I think he went to the comic shop in Corsham, which had a copy of the Tomb Raider guidebook. It was the only place he could get it, because he was stuck on one of the levels of the game and needed to know how to get past it. This is another example of games being absolutely rock hard in difficulty during this period. I don't think games are as difficult now as they used to be. And I've recently been playing the remaster of the first 3 Tomb Raiders on the PS4, which was released a couple of months ago. And I can't believe, even in the opening levels, how difficult it is to try and figure out what it is you need to do and then how to do it, and getting to different places in time to do the different actions. It's unbelievable. An absolute great choice to start this rundown of our favourite games of 1996. This is, as you say, an absolute icon. And that theme music, I have to agree with you. I could hear it just then playing in the background as you were talking about it in my head. Absolutely superb.
Fantastic. Glad you agree. What is your first choice then?
So I'm going to try and conjure up the scene for you. My parents have moved to this new house, and in the garden, right at the back of the garden, is what we called the summer house. So it was a little prefabricated building. It wasn't a shed. It had sort of glass panes in the doors, and it opened up, and it had power inside it, and it was clearly supposed to be used for summer house purposes, drinks of a summer evening, etc. But I was basically allowed to sort of have an extension of my bedroom in this summer house. There were a couple of power sockets out there. And when the PlayStation came into use in the main house, I was allowed to take the Mega Drive out to the summer house and connect it to my grandparents' old black and white TV, which they had just upgraded to a colour in their kitchen. So I had a small black and white TV and a Mega Drive out there in the summer house where I could play games in the garden. I mean, can you imagine? What else could I need?
It's a dream.
And one of the games that I played very heavily out there in the summer house was FIFA 97, which came out in October 1996 on the Mega Drive. So this is the first FIFA game that I remember really playing a lot. I think I'd messed around with a couple of football games before, but this was the first one that I got. And I thought, this is excellent. And I played it and played it and played it. This is the one, fact fans, with David Ginola on the cover in his Newcastle kit with the badges and sponsors removed. This was the first game I played that opened me up to the possibility as well of customizing teams. So this game had a function where you could customize your teams, and I had lots of fun playing around with that, making up kits and putting different names in. Obviously, the graphics weren't good enough for you to sort of change faces of players and everything. It was literally just the name and the team name and the team color and everything. So I remember very distinctly doing Chippenham Town, who I was going to watch at the time on a Saturday. So I remember putting all the players' names in and putting all the proper numbers in that they would wear and having them as a team on FIFA 97. And then I remember doing it with just my friends in my primary school class as well. So I had myself and Matt Coe and Joe Barter and people like that actually in the team playing with me. And then that's a love that I sort of carried on into my later childhood when I eventually graduated to FIFA 2000, which we'll talk about when we get to the games of 1999, because I've got some excellent customized team content for that when that comes through. I don't remember this, but I've looked at some of the information around FIFA 97, and there were some glitches in the commentary, and I'll just read this one out to you here. On rare occasions, when the game was being introduced by Des Lynam, the name of a player involved in the game would be said by John Motson instead of Lynam saying the names of both teams. For example, a match between Partick Thistle FC and Kilmarnock is Partick Thistle again. We've mentioned this is like the fifth mention of Partick Thistle on this podcast, and we've only been going about half an hour. This is unbelievable. Jagpod. And a match between Partick Thistle and Kilmarnock would sometimes be introduced by Lynam saying, "Welcome to the big match between," and Motson's voice interjecting with McPherson. So I don't remember that, but that's a little funny thing there. Also, of course, this had FIFA's famous indoor mode on it as well, with the five-a-side teams on the indoor court, which was a very fun mode to play. I'm not sure if FIFA games have it these days. They might well do. I've not played FIFA for a long time now, but I spent a long time playing on the five-a-side version of the game as well. Usually against a team from Norway called Odd Grenland, who I discovered were the worst team on the game. So I normally decided to play them and just hammer 12 goals past them over and over again. So this is FIFA 97. This is a game that I loved to play in black and white on the Mega Drive in the summer house. And this was the game that really sort of kick-started my love of football simulation.
Nice. So quite a momentous game for you then, really, because you are someone I associate with the football game of whatever guys. So, yeah, significant.
Oh, well, my reputation precedes me. I think probably around my early to mid-teens, I then pivoted really to management games. Probably when Championship Manager 0102 came out was the first one that I really got into heavily. Still play it today sometimes. And I then played management games far more often than I actually played actual football games. But this really was the gateway drug, definitely. So what was your first football game, if we can go off topic and out of 1996 for a minute?
Yeah, it was Kickoff 2 on the Amiga, which I think, I'm not sure exactly when it came out. It might be something that comes up when we do games of the earlier years in the decade. But it was that I played that a lot with my brother, 2-player. That was a top-down style. This is the era of the top-down. And then eventually that was superseded by the Sensible World of Soccer, which is obviously a iconic football game, one of the best ever. And I was probably playing that in 96, actually, because I didn't start playing the more modern diagonal angle style football games until Actua Soccer 2, which I think was maybe 98 or something like that. Mm-hmm. Maybe next year, 97. So, yeah, I was very much top down at this point.
One more thing on football games, just before we move on. As we record this, we're about a week and a half away from Euro 2024 starting. I still have the official game from Euro 96 on the Sega Saturn, along with, of course, the Sega Saturn hanging around in my parents' garage. What say I dig both of them out and do a little tournament play-along while the Euros are on? What do you think?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Great idea.
I'll have to see if wife of the pod, Beth, will tolerate me bringing any more 90s related tat into the house. So that's pending that decision. But I'll let you know. I'll keep you informed. Okay, so what's second on your list?
Second on my list is Destruction Derby 2, released on the PS1 and the PC, developed by Reflections and published by Psygnosis, which I think did so many great games around this era. We're in the Psygnosis era here, aren't we? Big time, I think. It was released on the PC in 1996, so that's how I'm allowed to talk about it. It actually came out on the PS1, which is what I had it on in 97, but just about squeaked into 96 on the PC. So this was a racing game where you were encouraged to smash into your competitors at any given opportunity. You had traditional races where you were racing around a circuit and you wanted to win with your position in the race, but there were also death matches where you would just be in a giant arena or bowl and you would have to crash into each other, and it was last car standing. So there were two equally fun modes on it there. I've chosen this not only because it was a really great game that I enjoyed a lot, but it was also the first game we got on the PS1, so it was quite significant.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So, yeah, this would have been 1997, because I got the PS1 for my 12th birthday, I think that would have been in 97. That sounds right, doesn't it? So we had no games for it when I first got the console. We just had Demo 1, which we played to absolute death, because it was, I think we discussed in previous episodes how Demo 1 there were different versions of it, like depending on the year that it came out.
Yeah.
And the version we had was an absolutely killer version of it. So it had a game that I'm going to talk about next, but also had this Destruction Derby 2 demo on it, and I played it on there a lot. So eventually, probably after a few months of just playing Demo 1, we decided to get a new game, or we thought we had to get a new game, me and my brother, and it was a toss-up between this and the next game I'm going to talk about. Because I was really into motorsport at this time, I plumped for Destruction Derby 2. I was given, I think, the executive decision because it was technically my PlayStation. So we looked in Trade It, as was the style at the time, to quote Grandpa Simpson. Inevitably, it was probably in fish ponds, because everything in Trade It was in fish ponds. I don't know if you remember that, which ironically is now pretty much where I live, or just down the road.
You shouldn't have kept buying the fish ponds version of Trade It.
That's why it was.
There was probably a Wiltshire version that Dad of the Pod wasn't picking up.
Yeah, he kept getting on his way back through northeast Bristol and getting the wrong one. But we ended up in some teenager's bedroom. I remember it seeming kind of strange, like we shouldn't have been there. It felt weird being in this guy's bedroom. For some reason I can still picture it, and that's where we got Destruction Derby 2. I don't know how much it would have been back then for pre-owned, but probably not that cheap, because if you remember, PlayStation 1 games back then were still 45 quid.
Yeah.
They're one of the very rare things that were sort of unaffected by inflation. They started off quite expensive, and then up until even like 5-10 years ago, they were still 40 to 45 quid. It's weird how that didn't change, but secondhand I'm not sure. And that's why we got it. So it was a big moment, our first game. I think Destruction Derby 2 is a great example of the sequel being better than the original game, and also more prominent. Like, no one really talked about Destruction Derby. I don't think it was a very big game at the time. Street Fighter is obviously the biggest example of this. Who talks about Street Fighter 1, you know? Have you ever met anyone who even had Street Fighter 1? So it was definitely better than the second one. It was just a load of fun. It's exactly as you'd expect from that sort of game. I know it's spawned and inspired lots of games since, like the Dirt series have got games where it's basically Destruction Derby. The crash physics were really good. It's the first game I can remember playing where your car could flip on its roof, which was like a real novelty. Absolutely loved that. And every time you crashed, it would just be a shower of polygons, like proper polygons, like triangular polygons just flying everywhere. And I played it a lot. I played it a whole bunch, and I had to choose it because it's a great game. But most importantly, it is a significant game in my gaming history. The first game I got on the PlayStation 1, and that's why I've chosen it.
Strong memories of. I never had it myself, but I remember playing it in my friend down the road, Sam Civic's bedroom a lot. I remember he had it, and it was a great sort of two-player party game, wasn't it? To play there, definitely. So
Yeah.
absolutely fantastic choice. Two things here that jump out for me that I didn't know before. First of all, was that you just had the console and the demo disc, and you played the demo disc for months before getting another game, which I think is absolutely superb. And secondly, going all the way to fish ponds to get a game out of a second-hand paper is something that would not happen now.
I did also notice on the intro, I was watching the intro on YouTube, and the fictional city they're heading to is Liberty City. And I was wondering if there was some sort of crossover there with the Grand Theft Auto games, or is all computer games set in the world where Liberty City is the nearest metropolis? I don't know. What's your second choice?
Okay, well, I'm going driving as well, and I'm sticking with Psygnosis as well. So this is two links to Destruction Derby 2, and this is Formula One, which was the first sort of realistic racing sim that we had. So I'd played Destruction Derby with Sam, as I said, but this was the first one where it was based on proper racing with proper cars, proper drivers that you knew off the telly and everything. And there's a link here to a shocking story from our previous birthday bonus episode, where I smashed my head off that fella's garden wall. So I was aware that we had Formula One for the PlayStation, but for some reason, almost immediately after getting it, my dad lent it to the fella whose wall I smashed my head in on many years later, and we didn't get it back for months. And I really wanted to play it, and I kept saying to him, when are you going to get Formula One back? When are you going to get Formula One back? And eventually one day he came home from work and he had it, and of course straight into the console it went. I always used to pick the back marker teams, as is my style, and I remember trying to drive a season as a driver called Max Papis, Mad Max Papis, as he was known, in the Arrows, in the real Formula One world. It had a great soundtrack as well. Steve Vai and Joe Satriani appearing on the soundtrack, Murray Walker on the commentary, and I just remember this very fondly, as I say, as the first sort of real racing sim that I played. Obviously, Colin McRae Rally and things like that would come along later on with the different styles of racing, and Colin McRae Rally is one of the greats, as I think we've already discussed again in our roundup episode from before. But just a shout for the Formula One game here, because it was based on the 1995 Formula One Championship, so it allowed you to sort of follow through that whole season, and it had sort of elements from the season because it was released after the season had finished. There were elements of the season which it took into the game, so the starting grids were the same, and halfway through the season Simtech would disappear because they pulled out of the championship after the Monaco Grand Prix that year. So I'm not sure how that worked if you were chosen to drive as a Simtech driver.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, but the starting grids were the same, with the timing included on the qualifying as well. And it's regarded as one of the best PlayStation games of 1996, and therefore one of the best early PlayStation games. So it's another hit from Psygnosis. And Alex, as a massive Formula One fan around this time, I would imagine this would have been in your collection as well?
It actually wasn't. I think it was on that demo 1 disc, because I definitely played a little bit of it. But I got F197, which was a sequel, probably quite soon after I got the PlayStation. So I just went straight to that. I remember this being out, though, and it being, playing the demo, and it just being so exciting because I'd sort of grown up playing the Jeff Crammond Microprose F1 games on the PC, so on the Amiga, I should say. So the original Formula One, then F1 2, F1 3, and this was quite different. They were much more authentic simulations. This was still quite realistic, but a little bit more arcadey. And it was, kind of a revelation to have the 3D and Murray Walker's commentary, which was so good. Like, you get commentary on like a lot of the old football games were sort of laughable and really poorly produced, but this was so well done. And am I right in thinking Martin Brundle was doing a co-commentary? Or was that? I guess that would have been 97, wouldn't it? Wouldn't have been in the first one because he was still racing in 95.
That's right. It was just Murray on the original game. I can still hear him saying in my mind now, "We're on the penultimate lap." I can still hear that in his dulcet tones now.
Yeah, it was such good commentary, and seeing all those cars, because it was so kind of current, it was up to date, and unlike those F1 games on the Amiga, which were like years behind. So yeah, seeing all the liveries, which I think may be the greatest season ever for Formula One liveries, certainly in my nostalgic mind. So yeah, it was a great game, and yeah, really exciting to have that sort of level of realism and Murray's commentary, of course. So great choice. I'm glad you've chosen it so we can talk about it.
I do have some livery trivia here, if you're interested, from this game.
Oh.
The game's original release date was pushed back to allow the developers time to make last-minute tweaks, fix bugs, and make the complex graphical changes needed to remove cigarette and alcohol advertising, which is illegal in video games in some parts of the US. So any of those classic tobacco liveries that we've been rhapsodizing about on the pod in recent times would have been wiped out of the game. They would have been covered over because it was illegal in the States. There you go.
That's a real shame. I think so. They were taken out of the UK version as well, I think, weren't they? I don't remember there being Marlboro and stuff on the side of cars. I reckon they took it out of all of them.
I think it probably was for that reason. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Such a shame. Oh, it's making me fancy a cigarette now.
Well, I'm thinking I might go and spray Benson and the Hedges and spray paint on the side of my car just to get one back. Get one back for the tobacco companies.
Oh, you absolutely should.
Well, I can't believe it. We're at our final choices already.
So as I was alluding to with my second choice, we had the options of 2 games to make our first purchase for the PlayStation 1 back in 97. I chose Destruction Derby 2 eventually, but my brother's choice was Die Hard Trilogy. So this was the second game that we got for the PlayStation 1. It was released right at the end of 1996 on the PlayStation 1, the Saturn and the PC. So again, Nintendo didn't get it. We would have bought it, like I say, in 97, I think, maybe the beginning of 98. And again, as I say, it was on Demo 1, and we played it to death on there as well. It was a section from the second part of the game, which I'll come to in a moment. And it was the replayability was just so good that you could just play that demo, as we did for a month. And I think eventually we went to Games Exchange in Chippenham to buy this second hand. Probably would have given us a great deal down there. Classic Games Exchange purchase. Yeah, it's a brilliant game. So it's split into 3 parts, hence the trilogy, part of the name. This was pre Die Hard 4.0 and all the trashy post with a vengeance games in the Die Hard canon, which we can always ignore. And so it was in 3 parts. The first part, based on the first game, is a third-person shooter where you're walking around the Nakatomi Plaza. You start in the basement and you have to work your way up. Each floor is a different level. And it's, as I say, a third-person shooter. Some of the greatest window-smashing sound effects in any game of any era. The most satisfying game in which to smash the windows, especially with a machine gun, a heavy machine gun. The sound effects in this game were so good. And the sound of shooting villains as well. The cries of anguish they gave was something else to behold.
Bye-bye, bad guy!
Mate, if I can just stop you there.
Go on.
You are okay, are you?
I am now. Yeah.
Okay.
I got it all out of my system playing this game in 97, didn't I?
It just seemed to me that you were reveling in that a little bit too much. I had to intervene.
Yeah, no, quite right. And then the second part of the game, which obviously follows the second film, which we talked about in our first Christmas episode. I think it might have been my choice for the best Christmas film of the 90s. I can't remember. Maybe my brother's choice. But this is set at Dulles Airport in Washington, and this is like a first-person on-rails shooter, so like Time Crisis style. You don't move around; you just let the character move, and you shoot at people. Ideally with a light gun, although we didn't have a light gun, we just had a normal controller, so it wasn't ideal. But it's still a lot of fun. And then the third part of the trilogy was a driving game based on Die Hard with a Vengeance. So you're driving around New York City in a variety of cars, usually a taxi cab, and you've got a time limit. You have to find where the bomb is and then crash into it to defuse it. And it's incredibly frantic, incredibly stressful. This was the game where I was most prone to fits of rage, I think, of just not quite getting to the bomb in time and getting caught behind lampposts endlessly and that sort of thing. Also the most inappropriate for children to be playing, because you could just plow down the pavement and your windscreen would just be splattered with blood, and the windscreen wipers would turn on and just like sweep all the blood off the windscreen. I think it was a 15 actually, the game. So technically I shouldn't have been playing it, but I was just gleefully reveling in it all, clearly, as you had to stop me a minute ago. So
there's going to be a wood panelled station wagon coming to collect you. Okay.
Yeah, collecting my dad of the pod. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think it had any lasting impact on me, on my psychology, but it was certainly something we played a lot of. I never completed the first part. I did complete the second part, and the third part. God, did anyone complete that? That was just impossible. But overall, just fantastic value for money, especially when it went platinum and it was 20 quid. I mean, you couldn't get better than that. I think the first and second games were good enough standalone games on their own to be better than a lot of games around at this time. So I chose it, for that combination. Kind of significant for me personally. Also amazing value and just a fantastic game. And it's an all-timer, I think, on the PlayStation. Did you ever play it?
I did. We had it on the Saturn, I'm pleased to report. So I know the game very well. The element of it that I remember most clearly is the taxi driving for the third part. And like you say, never being able to quite manage it, and the bomb sort of going off when you're halfway across the city, which, as you say, was very frantic and very frustrating. But yeah, there can be no doubt that this is definitely an all-timer. To have elements of all three movies in the same game and bringing them all together as one was, I think, a little bit of a masterstroke. And as you say, the playability was very high as well. And yeah, just an excellent sort of arcade-style game.
I've always thought that Sean Dyche looks like a generic baddie from Die Hard Trilogy. You ever thought that? There's something about him. I think it's the fact that he's got his ears are completely flat against his head, so it looks quite basic. And his sort of goatee and his stern look. I can just imagine him with an MP5 coming at me in the airport on midway through the part 2 of the game.
That is a great shout. Absolutely brilliant. I'll never be able to look at him in the same way again.
Right, what's your final choice then?
Okay, my final choice tonight. And this actually could have been a number of games, but I've gone for a game called Pandemonium on the Sega Saturn. So this really represents the time in mine and my dad's gaming careers when we would go to the aforementioned Pink Planet Games Exchange in Chippenham of a weekend, and we would buy absolutely anything. You know, as long as the box looked good and we thought it would be enjoyable, then we would buy it. And there would be games that I didn't quite understand at the time that were more for my dad, like the platformers, things like that. And there would be the general sports games like Euro 96, as I've mentioned, FIFA 97. I remember one called Street Racer, which was like a sort of Micro Machines type thing, which was very enjoyable for me as well. But Pandemonium I've chosen to represent the sort of random game that we would pick up and we didn't really get that far with, because as I mentioned with Tomb Raider, it was just so difficult. Platformers were really difficult back in those days. Now, I'm not sure you're familiar with this game, are you?
No, I remember the name. I remember it being out, but I never played it.
Okay, so I'll just read you the synopsis. It sounds rock hard just from the synopsis. Pandemonium features Fargus, a joker, and Nikki, a sorceress, who unwittingly casts a spell that destroys the town. The goal of the game is to reach the wishing engine, where they can wish the town back to normal. And for each level, the players could choose which character to be. They could choose to be Nikki or Fargus because they both had different special moves, which were helpful at various points in different levels. So I remember this being a game where at the end of a level, a password would be displayed on the screen. And then you would have to note that password down and then enter it again next time so that you could pick up the game where you left off. So there wasn't any sort of save function. You had to get to the end of the level and then get the password. And this was one of many such games that we purchased around the time. I remember another one called Mr. Bones, which was a similar thing about a skeleton that escapes from a laboratory and has to save the world in some way. I remember him playing guitar as well. That was quite a heavy part of the game that my dad bought. So we had a lot of these games, which my dad would play a few levels of and then wouldn't be able to sort of get past and then would put away again. And we've said it many times before when we've been discussing games on this podcast, before the advent of the internet, and if you couldn't get hold of a guidebook like my dad managed to do with Tomb Raider, if you got to a certain point, then you couldn't do anything about it if you couldn't figure out what to do or you weren't good enough to get past that point. I remember my dad's friend, Chris Jordan, who I think I mentioned on a recent pod, phoning up my dad to see if he had any tips for Abe's Odyssey, which we didn't even have. you know, and that was the way it was back then.
Yeah.
Was it better? Was it worse? I don't know. I think I'm definitely grateful for the University of YouTube for things such as, minor fixes on my car and things around the house. Are we selling ourselves down the river when it comes to finishing games too easily? Do we need to go back to the advent of the rock hard platformer? So that's Pandemonium, a very, very hard platform game, which for me represents a number of such games that we had during the period.
Yeah, I think it's good that you've chosen a game to represent that style of game shopping, and also, as you say, the difficulty of games back then. Having looked at it on YouTube, it's also one of those very late platform games where it's side on, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like a traditional platform game, but it's 3D. So it's trying to sort of preserve the classic side-scrolling platformer, but bringing it into the 3D era. And I don't think that lasted very long. I guess Abe's Odyssey was another one like that, which was kind of a bit more of a classic, I suppose, but very rarely found now, especially from the big studios, because it is a bit old school. But an interesting game, I suppose, to represent that crossover period of the previous generation of gaming to the newer generation. So a good choice for that, I think. And as you say, yeah, not being able to save it till you got to the end of a level, completely unheard of now. I'm not sure if I'd want to go back to that era, really. Tomb Raider 1 is another example of that. Like, you didn't have to get to the end of a level, but you'd have to get to a save crystal. And once you'd used that save crystal, it was gone. You couldn't go back to it. I don't know why they made it so strict, why they were so harsh about that. They just didn't want you to save it. But it was, a different time, a harder time. And so many games uncompleted back then.
Definitely. I've never seen past the first 2 or 3 levels of Sonic the Hedgehog, for instance. Never.
Yeah,
because you have to sit there and play the whole game and finish it.
It's mad, isn't it? There's games that I played for years and years and years that I have only ever seen the third level of. It's sort of weird to look at it now, but it was a different generation. What can we say?
Any honourable mentions or anything else that's caught your eye that you think should be discussed here?
Just 2 games for my honourable mentions. One is Grand Prix 2, which I alluded to with my talk of the Formula 1 games. This was a Micropose Jeff Crammond game on the Amiga and the PC, which was a game I played a lot. Much more of a simulation game and very realistic. And another game like you with FIFA, I would change all the names to be my friends from school. So it had that element. Another game is Wipeout 2097, another big PlayStation cultural game, I think, with the music, I think by the Chemical Brothers, something like that. And a proper sort of dance soundtrack, didn't it? Which was another game that was on Demo 1. I mean, what a demo disc, honestly. And then in terms of the big releases that we haven't talked about, I think Quake, Crash Bandicoot, Parappa the Rapper, and Resident Evil were all maybe 4 of the biggest games that came out this year that none of us chose. I will be talking about the director's cut of Resident Evil next year, so don't worry about that. Some other big ones there. And the Super Mario 64, some people will be saying, why haven't you talked about that? Technically, that came out, am I right, Stu, in 97 in the UK?
Well, when you started speaking at the beginning of the show about the Nintendo 64 being released in 1996, my mind immediately flashed to advertising hoardings at Premier League grounds. And do you know what I'm going to say here? I'm talking about black text on a white background that simply said Nintendo 64, 1st of March 1997. So throughout the second half, after Christmas in the 96-97 season, on Match of the Day and everywhere else, you would see these advertising hoardings. So it's always been part of my gaming knowledge that the Nintendo 64 was released in the UK in March 97. So yeah, Super Mario 64, I think I discussed that on one of the other gaming episodes we did. But when 1997 rolls around, as you say, boy howdy, will we be going back to talk about Super Mario 64?
Yes, I'm sure we will. Yes, yeah. So the N64 must have come out in Japan, I guess, in '96. Much like the PlayStation 1 came out a year earlier in Japan. One odd release that I noticed came out this year, which was the Robert E. Lee Civil War General strategy game, which I read quite a lot about on Wikipedia, and there was absolutely no mention in the long Wikipedia article about the fact that you're clearly on the wrong side in this game.
Oh no.
Absolutely no mention at all of the fact that you're playing a Confederate war general in this strategy game, which I thought was kind of amusing. But that's all of my my honourable mentions and other things that happened in this year. So as you said at the start, what a year for games.
I think we can all agree. I mean, normally on these episodes, we only scratch the surface. We've definitely only scratched the surface here. There's plenty more to discuss. 96, definitely a classic year for video games. Well, that wraps us up for our retrospective of the video games of 1996. I really enjoyed that, Alex. I think there's a couple there that I'm going to have to dig out and actually play again.
I don't have the capacity to play these games, so I will just have to watch playthroughs on YouTube. But I'm perfectly happy doing that. I do it anyway, so, why not do it again now?
I can feel the pull of the Euro 96 playthrough. I think this is going to happen, whether I like it or not.
We don't have control over these things, do we? Let's be honest.
Let's let the universe decide, as I tend to say when I'm passing a pub or a takeaway. Let's let the universe decide. So, if any of our listeners have got any favourite games from 1996 that they want to write in and tell us about, please don't write in and tell us if your favourite game from 1996 was the Robert E. Lee Confederate General strategy game. Alex, how can our listeners get in touch?
They can find us on our link tree, which has the relevant links to all of our social media. I'll put a link below to the link tree. Click on that. Send us a message on Instagram or X, or even send us an email and we'll read it in a few months. And yeah, we'd love to hear from you because we always love to know what your favourite games are from each year that we do. So yeah, get in touch.
Well, we've got several irons in the fire for our episodes coming up over the summer. We've got some great guests coming up and some great topics. So we look forward to being back with you in a couple of weeks to discuss one of those. Until next time, though. It's goodbye from me. I'm just off to go and buy a Partick Thistle shirt because things seem to just be going that way.
And I'm just off to listen to the Tomb Raider menu music and weep silently tears of nostalgia.
Bye for now.
Goodbye.